Okay, so stem cells can be found in embryos and bone marrow, in the umbilical cord, and they can help an injured body grow new cells. So if the body loses blood, it activates stem cells to make new blood. As primordial cells, stem cells can develop into any kind of differentiated cellular tissue. It can develop into bone, muscle, nerve, and so on. That's why they are considered so valuable. So, in theory, they can be directed to form new bones, neural cells, cardiac tissue, and cure diseases. So, that's really what has prompted so much interest in stem cells and stem cell research. So, at the time, in around 1998, physicians already knew that the body had stem cells, but they didn't have an easy way to grow them. And that's when John Gerhardt of Johns Hopkins University and James Thompson of the University of Wisconsin discovered a way to continually produce stem cells. So they created an immortalized stem cell line rather than the previous process, which involved them tediously deriving them from small amounts of tissues from embryos or from fetuses. So, in effect, what Gerhardt and Thomas discovered was how to make human embryos into these tiny, like, stem cell factories. And that created a whole new controversy because this objectification of human embryos really bothered critics who felt that using human embryos for this kind of purpose demeans the dignity of human life and is one of those slippery slopes that we've talked about so much this semester. Another controversial development occurred in 1998, and that was the advanced cell technology, and they're from Massachusetts. And they had announced at that time that they were able to make differentiated human cells, so not stem cells, differentiated cells that had a specific purpose. They were able to make them revert to this primordial state by fusing them with cow eggs. So, although the cow egg was the medium for the nucleus of the human cell, so the nucleus of the cow egg had already been removed, the whole process just sounded alarms. Again, particularly the ethics of it and the or the perception that this biotechnology was just out of control. And President Clinton at the time had a National Bioethics Advisory Committee, and they actually condemned any attempts to create children out of these hybrids. So there, the perception is that you're creating these monster children because you're using a cow egg, but there's no nucleus within the cow egg. It was just the medium by which this was happening. Although it had previously condemned reproductive cloning in 1998, the National Bioethics Advisory Commission that I mentioned previously, so under President Clinton, they previously said no. They then, in 2001, concluded that the government should fund research on stem cells created from human embryos. While Congress never accepted the recommendation, because cloning embryos was still connected to a larger issues. And at the time, there were lots of people who were making false claims about cloning and what they were able to achieve. So there were lots of kooks out there who were saying they were accomplishing cloning and STEM and research, and so it was really difficult at that point for Congress to be able to support it. In 2001, adult stem cells were discovered. So scientists discovered that stem cells were not only in bone marrow, but also throughout the entire human body. And the researchers started using these adult stem cells in research rather than using the stem cells derived from human embryos. And that really opened up, it kind of opened and closed things, because with the advent of the adult stem cells, there became a lot more discussion about, do we really need to use the embryonic or the embryonic stem cells? That was kind of a controversy. So, at that time, over the next couple of years, researchers discovered that many of the organs and tissues in the human body contain precursor cells that act like stem cells, and these adult stem cells become specific kinds of cells more quickly than the embryonic stem cells. Um, so again, these adult stem cells can be obtained from various points throughout the body. They're in the intestines, the skin, the liver, bone marrow. So, it became a process of, if someone has heart disease, then if we can find a cell in an adult heart that has the ability to replicate and has the ability to replicate faster, it's easier to start with that than an embryonic stem cell, which has many different options. But the adult organs don't contain a lot of stem cells, so there aren't as many medically, so it's harder to grow them and it's harder to be able to do the research on them. In 2001, George Bush, in his first press conference on bioethics, and first ever, not just his, but first ever by an American president, he announced his policy on federally funded research on human embryos, and he rejected using the funds to create embryos for research, but allowed them for research on 60 stem cell lines created from spare embryos. So these were already existed stem cell lines. So he permitted the use of what was already there, but not the creation of any other ones. So this was the start of really American politics becoming much more involved in the bioethical issues. A year after that press conference, the number of stem cell lines appeared to be small. They only were about 15. And then scientists questioned whether Bush, the policy that he had put in place, would allow them to do the biological research that was needed. So years later, they really said those 15 lines were just not adequate. So in terms of legislation, different states have enacted legislation. 2010, Sam Brownback was governor of Kansas. He published a bill in Congress to make all forms of cloning and a federal crime. So Congress was attempting to separate the embryonic from reproductive cloning many times over the years, and that was culminated by George Bush in 2006. So Sam Brochuk was governor of Kansas in 2010. In 2001, he was in Congress, so I want to make sure that I get the timing correct here. So it was vetoed by Bush in 2006 to allow federal funding of research on the embryos. Ultimately, Barack Obama in 2008 allowed that funding. Bush also tried to ban all forms of cloning worldwide, and that's quite lofty. He's trying to implement it worldwide, although he's president of the United States. But it didn't get very far within the United Nations. So although Congress was having difficulty with this, they really couldn't make a decision. So that made the action regarding cloning to fall to the states. California in 2002 passed Proposition 71, which gave $3 billion for stem cell research from human embryos. And then several other states both enacted legislation to allow for research and then also other states criminalized the use of embryos for research. Just briefly to talk about other animal cloning. So after Dolly was the first, but she wasn't the last. So there have been other ones. In 1998, 2 calves were cloned. Another lamb was cloned in 1998. 3 generations of mice were cloned in 98. A rhesus monkey in 99. 5 pigs in 2002. A goat was cloned in 2002. A rat in 2003. Some champion dairy cows and bulls between 98 and 2004. A horse in 2003. A mule in 2003. A deer in 2003. And a cat named Carbon Copy in 2001. So researchers have not been able to, you heard that list, researchers haven't been able to clone a primate, and much less clone anything really reliable without harming the proteins that guide the chromosomes in cell division. Important thing to note is in 2005, the South Korean team of Hwang Suk cloned an Afghan hound, which is in this picture here, and his name was Snuppy, and that was for the name was for Southern. I have to get it for you. It was from Snuppy, Southern New England University, not New England, but Southern something University puppy, and that's where his name came from. So this Afghan hound, this was the dog that it was implanted in, and this was the dog that was cloned, and this is Snuppy. So they were successfully able to clone this Afghan hound, but because of their complex reproductive systems, dogs had previously not been cloned by scientists, but his team succeeded. And although we're going to talk about some of his fraudulent claims later on, this one was a success. So Snuppy was a success. So I mentioned Woo-suk's fraud. So in 2004, he made this claim, which seemed to be out of nowhere. He announced that he had not only successfully cloned viable human embryos, but he also derived viable stem cells from the embryos. And before this claim, biologists thought that creating a human stem cell in embryos by cloning couldn't be done. So this came out of the blue and nobody saw it coming. He said these stem cell lines could be genetically matched to the cells of donors and was going to open the doors to studying cells for people who had Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's disease. And he announced this at a meeting in Seattle of the American Association of Science. Big, lots and lots of attention. Michael J. Fox, who, as you know, has Parkinson's, hailed it as a major breakthrough. So everyone was very excited about this announcement. But it didn't take long for questions to arise about the published photos of the embryos, but because they didn't seem to be any different. All of the pictures seemed to be the same one. So he didn't even try to Photoshop or something. He was using the same pictures over and over again. So people started to notice that they weren't any different. In 2005, his assistants testified that he had forced them to make up the results and to alter the pictures of the embryos. And there was an investigation, and it concluded that he had, in fact, not produced any stem cell lines from human embryos, had not discovered easy techniques for doing so, had not produced any matching stem cell lines for donors. So he was charged and found guilty in South Korea for misusing millions of dollars of funds that were specifically given to him for this important work and for violating Korean laws and bioethics. He was actually sentenced to a 2-year suspended prison sentence and was barred from receiving further funds. So, he had made this other great accomplishments. He had, cloned Snuppy, but he was, because of these claims that were not true, he was found guilty and he wasn't able to do this anymore.